Hi, and welcome to the Life of Plenty podcast. I am one of your hosts, Ashley Michael, and I usually have Lisa with me, and she is not here today, and instead, this is going to be pretty interesting. I am here with a very special guest. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm your husband. You don't know me? No.
I'm here with Tony Michael today, who is my husband. Yes, and I'm excited. But he is also a therapist, has a PhD in, I don't even know, what is it in? Counselor education and supervision.
Yeah.
Yay. And has done a lot of research with attachment and play therapy and all sorts of really interesting things that kind of tie in pretty nicely with reading. So when I have finally convinced him to come on the podcast with me. So this may be a one-time only thing. So
I don't know. We'll
hope
see.
you all enjoy.
Yeah. This is unique. This is my first time doing a podcast, so I feel
You're natural.
very privileged. Yeah. To be able to be on your podcast. Unfortunately, Lisa's not here, so
I know she when she heard that I was doing this, she was like, I'm so sad, but she will be listening. Yeah. She's with us in spirit. Okay, so I would love to start maybe just because I think what you do is interesting. So I don't know if you could talk a little bit about how you or maybe with attachment or how reading or books might play a role in that. Because I think it's interesting. Tell us some science.
Okay. Well, I teach at Tech in the counseling and psychology department. And so, and I'm also a licensed professional counselor and national registered play therapist. And attachment to me, after I got my master's in counseling,
yes.
I went and worked at a treatment center.
Yes.
So did you. You went and worked
sure did. Yeah. I have a background in doing this as well, but Tony has really, he's very well suited to the counseling field.
So, I went and worked at this kind of residential boarding school for struggling teens out in the middle of East Nowhere,
yes,
Texas.
The Piney Woods.
Yeah. And so went there, and teens would come and live for about a year and a half, sometimes even more than that. And, when I was working those early years, I started to think of, you go through this place in your educational and professional development that you get done with school and you start trying to put things into practice in the application.
That's always a shift.
And you're doing so much reading,
Yep.
And I just found myself, conceptualizing what was going on just differently. And in particular, what I would have is a teenager who was saying that they didn't feel connected to their parents. There was different things going on in the family unit, various reasons for why they were there. But common theme, as I heard, regardless of the situation, is there was a issue of connection. And so I started to explore that, and I would talk to the parents or the caregivers, grandparents, whoever it was, and get their perspective of, how are things? And sometimes I would hear a similar message as, we just feel a level of disconnected. And other times I would hear a message of, no, I think we are connected, and so there was kind of a mixed message,
Right.
And so that took me on an exploration of really trying to make sense of what was going on. And I think that in my master's counseling program, we talked some about attachment, but I found myself on my own really seeking out and searching, what's going on in this relationship. And a good explanation or way to conceptualize what was going on was through attachment theory. And
so I know, and maybe I'm skipping ahead, but so you got to help sort of, what is it called? The ASPA thing that you have made. Yes. Can you explain that in layman's terms, what this thing is that you helped to create? And yeah.
So I went back to get my PhD years later, and
at Ole Miss, hotty toddy.
Yeah, that's right. And so went back to get my PhD, and one of my mentors there, she had developed an instrument called the Adult Scale of Parental Attachment.
Yes.
And that was based on a book by West and Sheldon Keller that took the premise of attachment theory. And so attachment theory more or less says that we're built to be in connection with other people. And so when you have secure relationships or secure connections, right, that people tend to feel confident, tend to feel
right. They know that will be there regardless of situation or circumstance or what they may say or do.
It's a protective factor. And so, and it goes back to books and studies that first derived from John Bowlby, who was a British psychologist during the 19th.
Is he the one that did the ducks?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I vaguely remember this. There was a study, and he had these little baby ducklings imprint on him, and they thought of him as their mother, and they followed him around.
Yeah. So the story.
It's been a while.
And so since this is a book based, Bowlby wrote a 3-volume series called Attachment and Loss. And
we do not carry that at the bookstore.
I ended up with 2 copies of these 3-volume sets. So I've
do
let
we still
students,
have those at our house? You have them at your office.
Yeah.
Thank goodness.
I let my students borrow
that's
one
valuable
set.
shelf space. Can we get rid of some? Okay.
But it looks at attachment and loss then throughout the lifespan. And so, but Bowlby drew his work on back in the 30s and 40s in connection with World War II, that there were a number of children who were typically fatherless, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then not just that the fathers went off to war in Britain, but also they were somewhat motherless too, because the women and mothers at that time went to go do the everyday jobs to make society work, right? Yeah. And so what he noticed is that there were a number of children, and in particular there was one child that supposedly followed Bowlby around, and the nurses and different people would say, the caregivers would say, he's your shadow. He's Bowlby's shadow. And so he started to recognize, okay, the power of connection. And this kid was drawn to him. And, and so Bowlby was sitting, the story is he was sitting at a park one day and reflecting on all these children who were almost orphaned, either physically or emotionally.
Right.
And he started thinking of ducks and how with imprinting of a duck that you can take a baby hatchling of a duck and that it can get attached to the caregiver, and that it can actually be a symbolic secure base or a safety net for that baby duck. And so attachment theory is based off of that. And others came along and wrote other books like Ainsworth and really did some more studying of looking at with infancy, of the connection between typically a mother caregiver and a baby or infant, and in particular how the response of that child in times of potential distress, would they get soothed? Would they, did they seek comfort from the mother? Were they able to be calmed down? And so there's a number of studies that, and the first one was called Strange Situation, where they just brought a stranger into a waiting room, and that
to see what the child would do.
Yeah, and the mother actually would leave the room for a second, and they would just kind of wait, to see, and then the key was, what was the response when the mother came back into the room? So, and the premise or the thought behind it was you could detect if the child had a secure or safe attachment or bond or connection with the parent.
Yeah.
And so from that time, attachment theory started off with really looking at the parent-child relationship. And over time, it's really continued to develop.
It's sort of broadened.
Yeah. I mean, they've looked at romantic attachment, sibling attachment, other forms of family attachment, and also looking at, in particular, different forms of like spiritual attachment, And so, but the whole premise is like the bond that between typically two people, or and the connection that's there. And so in my dissertation, what I did is I looked at, based off of a book by West and Sheldon Keller, that says, hey, these early attachments have an influence that Bowlby said was an internal working model. And so it's your way of seeing the world.
It sort of sets out how you interact or how you view the world based on if you have safe attachment or not, different things.
Yeah. And so then West and Sheldon Keller came and wrote a book called Patterns of Relating. And in that book, it more or less says that model that's kind of formed in those early foundational years of your life, right, end up creating a perspective and somewhat of a pattern of relating to other people. And those, whether it's in relationships with significant others, or whether it's in your own future relationship with your own children, or whether it's whatever relation, coworkers, whatever it is. And so the ASPA then takes their premise, and it looks at that there's these 5 different patterns of relating. And we all do the different patterns of relating, but we may do them to different levels of frequency, right? And so the 5 patterns are safe, and that's like what we've been talking about, like a safe pattern. So in those early years of like your first 14,
is that what they look at, the first 14 years?
Yeah, typically it's about like childhood, about first 14 years of early childhood. What was the relationship like? And so was there questions along the lines of like, I felt like I could go to my mom or mother figure. It doesn't have to be.
Right. Whoever your mother figure would be.
And so it's symbolic mother figure, but then also symbolic like father figure, right? Or parental caregiver, And so did I feel like I could go to that person and talk to him when I needed to?
Yeah.
And so that breaks down that there's these 5 different patterns, and these patterns are safe, right? Like I felt like I could go to them. I felt like they were a safe person to talk to. The next is dependent, right? So dependent is kind of to say, I needed my parent to make the decision for me.
Oh, okay.
Now, all children are dependent.
Right.
But, sometimes when you get a little older and you reflect back, you can kind of see like, was that a healthy dependence
Right.
or was I overly dependent?
Somehow we try
anxious.
to have our kids secure enough to where they can feel like they're empowered to make decisions, which is a tricky challenge. Okay, so that's the second one.
Yeah, so dependent. And then the third is parentified. And parentified is kind of unique in where it's I felt like I needed to be the parent for my parent.
Oh, right.
You know, so maybe there was some kind of loss, maybe there was some kind of thing that happened, right? And you know, sometimes it can be a physical loss, like a death, or sometimes it could be other forms of loss, emotional loss, you know, or ambiguous loss, but maybe like a divorce or something like that, you know. And so the child feels like that they need to parent the parent.
Right.
And then the next is actually fearful. And that fearful pattern is really connected to what Bowlby said originally is like an anxious attachment. It's a fear of abandonment, fear that the relationship
may go away.
May end at any time. And then the last pattern is connected to a distant relationship. And so that's more where the child looks and says, no matter how much I tried to get close to my parent, I couldn't.
Yeah.
They were keeping me at arm's length. They were keeping me distant, you know. And so these different dimensions, you know, then are scored on whatever parental figures you had.
Right.
And so recognizing that it's not, you know, we're not going to put all the guilt onto the moms, you know, but we're going to recognize that there's multiple caregivers involved in a child's life, and each one of those
has an impact on how they're, right. So the goal is, of course, we hope that everybody can have this secure attachment, but that doesn't always work out that way. Life is messy, and for whatever reason, you know, and that's why we have therapy, and we can work on it and can learn to you know, grow through these things. You know, not all is lost if you have had a difficult first 14 years. But what I'm curious to know, because I do want to, we have always tried to like read with our kids, which I think has to somehow help contribute to some secure attachment, right? Because so we have 4 kids, elementary, middle school age. So it looks different with all of them. But, you know, when your kids are younger, if you can read to them and look at the pictures and ask questions, that somehow has to contribute to like creating a secure attachment promotional environment.
Yeah, so I think this goes really well. So I mentioned I'm also a play therapist.
Yes.
And so there is play therapy is a modality, a therapeutic modality.
We're getting so scientific today.
No.
This is
It's a therapeutic modality where you use the language of a child.
Right.
Therapeutically.
Right. So you're not sitting and having conversations and saying, tell me about your childhood.
Yeah.
Like we have been doing now. You're just playing a card game together maybe, or playing with action figures.
Depends on so there's different theories associated with play therapy. But the overall premise is just say, use the language of a child, which is play. You know, especially for the first 12 years of life, play is really the language of a child. And so to use that language and to allow the child to get emotional expression, to feel understood, right, and for hopefully healing, you know. And so, you know, we're talking about these things with attachment, and now you're talking about, well, okay, reading books.
Right.
So there is a theory or based out of play therapy called Theraplay. And Theraplay in particular says that a healthy relationship is based on 4 ingredients. And the first is it structured? Is there structure in the relationship? Because structure equals consistency. And where there's consistency, there's safety. You know, and sometimes you have to be careful with words because some people might hear the word structure and feel like, ugh.
Right.
But it's more about like, right, is there consistent safety?
Yeah. Do I sort of know what I'm walking into here?
Yeah, in this environment, right? So the first is structure. The second ingredient to a healthy relationship, especially parent-child, is engagement, right? And so, you know, nobody really likes monotony, right? Or going through the motions of things. So there's something key about is there a level of engagement? Is there a level of excitement? Is there something not overly, right? Like, you know, not where it's too exciting that somebody feels a place of like hyper-vigilance, right? To be like, that's anxious producing.
Right.
But a place in terms of it's not boring. So there's a level of engagement. So that's the second one. The third one ingredient is nurture. And nurture is kind of the things that we've been talking about, right? I mean, the safety, the love, the care, right? That emotional connection, you know, those things in terms of nurture. And then the last is one that is not necessarily always talked about, but I think everybody's in agreement, is challenge. So in a healthy relationship, right, there is a place, it has deep roots. And so there's opportunities for things to be challenged and for it not to be uprooted. Yeah. You know, and so, I mean, conflict can happen in any relationship. I mean, you and I have been married 17 years next week?
I guess that's right. Happy anniversary.
But right, there can be some conflict at times, you know, that just happens with living life. And so when you read with a child, though, is what I think is you are giving opportunities to have structure with that child every night, right? Right. And then two, there's a level of engagement.
You can ask questions or talk about what's on the page and, oh, isn't this a silly picture? Or what do you think's going to happen? Yeah. Or whatever.
And then the third is it's nurturing, right? I mean, typically
you're close usually.
Yep. There's a place that you're snuggled close together and drawn on, you know, that kind of time. And there could be some opportunities where maybe the challenge isn't always there, but there could be some places with questions or
would it count, like trying to sound out the words if you're at that phase?
Yeah, that's a great point.
Is that a challenge?
Okay. Yeah, you know, or trying to pick things apart. But anyways, that's kind of a drawing together.
Well, that's really kind of cool because, I mean, we talk about the benefits of, I think nobody would argue that it's not important for your child to read and the benefits and how it grows their vocabulary and all this, but it's really neat to see that there are relational and emotional and all these developmental implications that can come out of, 10 minutes of reading a bedtime story. Yeah. And I will just say too, even if your kids can read independently and you just have missed that phase and you never read bedtime stories, it's not too late. It's not too late for you. We have done some books. You especially have read some books with our older kids. So I just want to encourage people, no matter what their age is, if you have a book of interest, you can read it together. Yeah. For your life of plenty. So thanks for being here. This was super interesting, and we will join us next time.
Special thank you to Stonecom, our radio station that made this production possible.